you'll have that as well. You can share with staff or whichever you need. We're also going to take some scheduled breaks, so probably every hour or so we'll take maybe 10 or 15-minute break, because I know I will have to go to the bathroom and get coffee, and I'm sure you all will too. Anyway, so feel free to do that as you need to. That's fine. But we're going to go ahead and get started, and if you have questions, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody, but if you have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can type your questions in. Either way is fine. Okay, Susan, you are on.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'll briefly go over our overview or agenda today, and then we'll kind of hop right into test and inspection and maintenance. So that's our first item. We'll cover responsibility and then test inspections, how they vary by NFPA 72 editions. Today I covered from 2007 to 2013, so that includes 10. And I don't know what your jurisdiction has adopted, but that kind of gives you an idea of what we at the state, we go by 2007, and then kind of what we're looking at with 2010 or 13. Where the code has moved. Then we'll look at smoke detectors versus smoke alarms.
I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 second, Susan. I'm sorry. Just while she's talking about code adoptions, just again, and we did send out an email, or I did send out an email here recently about the anticipated date. And again, we don't know for sure, but for the 2012 IFC and IBC, we're looking at probably June. It keeps getting pushed back further and further. Circumstances under not in our control, but anyway, I just wanted to keep you updated on that as much as I can.
Okay. So then we have smoke detectors versus smoke alarms. So looking at the difference and some issues with what code is mandating. Out of those items. Then on our second page, we will look briefly at some plans and some factors that you'll look at when doing fire alarm plan review. We can get more in depth on those as you have questions, so feel free to stop me on any of the items. But the plan review portion will get pretty in depth. We'll talk about CO detectors. We'll briefly cover that when we talk about Section 2, but we'll get more into it and some requirements, different codes, 4 and then 5 low frequency requirements, and we'll talk about where those are required and how to look for them on routine inspections. So first with test inspection and system maintenance, the first question that comes to mind, and we did receive some questions on this from local jurisdictions, was whose responsibility is it to maintain the system or to have it installed when you're dealing with a landlord-tenant situation? So let's say you have a building of suites, and we have the Dollar General, and we have a call center next to it, and then we have a beauty school next to it. Whose responsibility is it in that one building? We have 3 different tenants, and whose responsibility is it to maintain the fire alarm, and how many fire alarms are we even looking at? So to start off with that, and I'll reference 2007 edition of NFPA 72 for this, we're going to start off looking in Chapter 10 for test inspection and maintenance, and under responsibilities, we see the NFPA defines delegates the responsibility of fire alarms maintaining and installation to the property or building owner, or the owner's designated representative shall be responsible for inspection, test, maintenance of the system, or alterations or additions. So let's say a common issue here is that we had maybe business occupancy before. So, we have our beauty school, and then it's going to become, let's say, a church. So we're going to change to an assembly. How do we change to meet those requirements, and whose responsibility is it? So if it's not, NFPA also goes on to say that responsibility can be delegated to the tenant, but it must be in writing, and it must be provided to the authority having jurisdiction upon request. So if you go to inspect a building and the tenant's like, well, it's not our responsibility to maintain the fire alarm because they haven't had their annual test inspection. And the owner says, no, I told them it was. Unless the owner has put it in writing, it is the owner's responsibility. So that kind of gives us a clear finger to point, or a clear person for maintaining that system. So we can't say, well, you never told me, or I didn't know. Code tells us exactly how it should be. So that kind of clears that up. The next issue is when you go on an inspection and a building does have a test inspection done, but you look at their form and it doesn't really provide you a whole lot of information. How do we know what's required, and where do we draw the line? I've seen several one-page reports that are, they might put the date that they were there, they'll put the address of the building, might put who they talked to when they were there, and then the system tested okay and signed it and left. And that's not an acceptable test inspection for any of the years, any of the editions. But it's outlined in Chapter 10, kind of gives us a template for an FPA 72 2007 edition. Chapter 10 would be our guidance. And the nice thing about NFPA is they put a sample document or a template that you can actually modify for every code year right on their website. And I have the links listed here. So if you have a fire alarm contractor that's going in and doing test inspections with one page saying, I don't know what I should have, you can easily direct them to say, here, provide me a compliant report. This is a template. They don't even have to copy it out of, there should be no reason to have a copy out of the book, handwritten report that it really isn't legible. They make it pretty easy. So let's kind of talk about the difference in what is required to be noted on test inspection reports for different years. 2007, we see our template. Control. Yeah, I hit Control C. Sorry, guys, we're trying to figure out if I can open a link.
We had trouble with this before. Can you copy it and then just open up?
I've got my books in front of me. If you guys, I believe that was on the outline. Oh, okay. When you get the outline, when Mindy emails that after, you can go to this link. And like I say, I have it listed for all 3 editions I have here, and view what the different requirements are. But I'll kind of briefly go over how they change throughout the years. So 2007, we see a sample report. And we have the name of the building that we're at. We have the type of fire alarm system that's installed. So, we have let's say we've got a simplex 100, and we say that, is it monitored or not? We have central station monitoring. And if so, who monitors it? The company, the phone number. We look at not, and so let's say we do have it. It is monitored. How is it monitored? Are we using a UDAX? And really, that's the only applicable way anymore. You shouldn't be seeing true dialers. That's not a UL listed means for notification for fire alarm. So, and so the difference between a UDAC and a dialer just, it receives an input and it dials one number. It never knows whether anybody picks up. It's not really supervised. Your UDAC, it is supervised. You have 2 phone lines running to it. If it's a traditional POTS UDAC, and you know if somebody unplugs a phone line, you know if you have a phone issue, and okay. Then we talk about the software that's installed on the panel. What firmware are we on? What revision? And that's for the fire alarm contractor. If they had to update the last test inspection has been performed, they know that they can update it when they get their revision behind. We talk about signaling line, so that would be an addressable panel. We have SLC or we have IDC. So your IDC is if you're still a zone or a conventional panel. Your new your newer panels anymore, most of them are going to be addressable, unless you're dealing with a real small application. Then just cost-wise, it's cheaper to put a zone in. But we'll define how many circuits we have of what type. We'll look at pull stations. Are they addressable? Are they coded? And the number of pull stations. Smoke detectors, again, the same. We'll look at the number, whether they're addressable or conventional, and what technology they actually utilize to sense smoke, whether it's photoelectric or ionization. And then we'll list other devices such as smoke detectors, heat detectors, water flows, any supervisor signals. So if we have any tamper switches from the sprinkler, if we have a fire pump or a generator monitor on it, we'll list any annunciators we may have, remote annunciators. We'll list the location of the annunciator. And then if we have a system that includes voice notification, we'll list the components of it. And then we'll move on to notification appliances. So the numbers that are just horns, or the numbers that are horn strobe combinations, or the numbers that are strobe onlys. And then if we have any other items, like door holders or elevator recall or any other control functions that we're doing from the fire alarm. Then we'll get to information regarding the power supply for the fire alarm panel. So we'll list the location of the breaker number, and for the primary means of power. One thing we can do on that is when they list that on the report, go back to the breaker panel, open it up, and make sure that it is mechanically protected. So a lot of times, and that is in Chapter 4 of our 2007 under General, to mechanically protect your breakers from unauthorized or inadvertent tampering or just flipping the breaker because you don't know what it goes to. And it must be identified. So on your panel legend, you need to see your fire alarm panel. As far as secondary power goes, whether we have a generator, whether we're just using batteries is by far the most common. You'll see most anymore. You'll see just sealed lead acid batteries. in the panel. Something to be aware of on your sealed lead acid is that NFPA does define our lifespan for fire alarm batteries. You have 4 years from date of install, which should be written on the battery, or 5 years from manufacture date. Now, they also have to pass an annual load test. So whichever comes first, whichever factor they fail at first, obviously. But with your 5 years from manufacture date, that can sometimes be hard to tell. So more often than not, you're going to end up going by install date, simply because many manufacturers use a coded date. So unless you get on the internet and cipher for it, the code, you're just going to be better off going by your 4 years. And then we can look at when the system was installed. If you're going to a new startup, you'll have an additional requirement besides the test inspection form. You'll also be looking for what they call a record of completion, and that should be filled out. That essentially is giving the installer, the contractor, and the building owner a record, and yourself, that system, to the best knowledge of the installer, which may be an electrical contractor, your contractor, fire alarm contractor, so they'll do the programming, and the building owner and yourself, that system is installed to what code it was specified on the code footprint and designed to. And that kind of gives responsibility for it. So there'll be a portion for everyone to sign on that. The installer, contractor, and building owner, as well as yourself. So when you go to final or to issue a certificate of occupancy for a building that has just installed a fire alarm system, in addition to the test inspection, you will be looking for this record of completion. Do we have any questions on any of that? It'll make it a little more clear once you can look at the templates online. But like I say, it's kind of outlined. The main difference, in 2007, all our components are still required in 10 and 13. We just changed the way that we list them. So in 2010, we completely changed the form, the test inspection template, and that is because we start to see the addition of voice notification, or being much more prevalent and required by both IBC and then NFPA 72 for where it's required and when it's going to be installed. And then in 13, they have a much better template report. We actually, instead of having a 5 or 6 page long report that we're going to have for probably 50% of the systems you're going to see, you're going to have NAs in half of them because it's not a voice system. In 13, we changed that, and so you have a base report, and then you have additional forms as they may apply. So if you don't have any remote NAC panels for notification, you don't have to fill out that form. It's not attached. If you don't have a voice system, you don't fill out those 2 pages, and it's not attached. So it makes it a lot easier.
Susan, I can't get to that. If you want to get to the internet.
Okay. Okay. And I think we might be able to go to the internet now. So
I just thought. Is it on the online codes? Is that where this link takes you?
No, you just go to NFPA, and I can navigate there.
Okay, so if I can
actually search for it on.
Because what I can do is
look at a 2010 template here.
It's just slow. Alrighty then.
Well, we might try a different link here. Okay, here's, it went ahead and downloaded it instead of actually giving me the NFPA page, but this will help you guys understand anyway. So I just kind of wanted to show you where it was and how to navigate through the different editions online, but it's simple enough to search for. So here's a 2010 sample of a test inspection, and this is basically what we talked about, but we'll notice a significant difference from the 2007, mainly just in format, because we don't make it really any easier for the AHJ or for the contractor to fill out or navigate. We still have quite a few spaces that we're going to see NA on, probably half of our systems. But it is nice that where we have here is we do have sections that just give you the option to say nothing here is going to apply. I mean, it's still listed, but we're getting better than 2007 was here. And then Annunciator Location, if you have any or this doesn't apply, it makes it really easy to look through. And what they've done, they've actually defined what you should be looking at from, so that this would come from, if you look at their test inspection table and their methods, it would be detailed for when you're looking at the control panel. So they've kind of incorporated that table into the test inspection and given you items to check that you've visually or functionally tested. And then here we have the section for voice evac, if we do have it. And if we have any mass notification. Now that's kind of an important distinction, is that a lot of people, if we have voice evac, well, it's automatically mass notification. And there's a significant difference between the two. So you probably won't see mass notification implemented. That's typically a DoD spec for federal buildings, or your military branches. So you really won't have it. It includes components such as outdoor notification, and just typical DoD specs that you won't see anywhere else. So that's not going to be really applicable for probably almost 100% of our systems. But they do, in this one, they do kind of share some items from voice evac. So you'll notice you'll still have, you list your ambient conditions, list your alarm conditions. So you still have to meet audibility. But we do see something, a different requirement added, which is intelligibility. And if we have questions on that, we can go into that a little bit later. because that kind of incorporates with some plan review items. If we have any two-way communication, so if we have any high rises that we're putting a fire command center or in where we might have firefighter phones or leaky coax or whatever system we're using to achieve the two-way communication.
I was thinking this form was on our website. I may have to double check that, but
I think there's a sample button from 2002. I think it's 2002.
Okay. I was gonna say I know I've seen this out there somewhere, but.
And then because in 2010 we did see the addition of fire extinguisher monitoring, so that's included here. Carbon monoxide detectors, that's a unique requirement we'll talk about a little bit about later. But that is an addition, code-driven addition. And let's see, if we have any special systems, we list them here. If we have any control functions, we're listing them. And this is a difference between 2007 and 2010 here is alarm initiating devices. And we explicitly say in our form that we have to attach a sheet listing all devices tested and the results of those. So they can't say 12 smoke detectors out of 12 smoke detectors tested okay. That does not meet code here. That does not meet what in FPA 72 the intent of their reports. So you'll expect to see what type of device it is, the location of the device, whether it's how it reports. So is it an alarm? Is it a supervisory, or is it a trouble? You know, and then let's say we have a water flow. We'd want to know not only that it did alarm the building, but how long did it take to alarm the building? So, and that can kind of cross over from your sprinkler contractors reports. Supervisory question, I think, or an issue many of you guys have is how, in your jurisdiction, how do you prefer that duct detectors report? And a lot of times, you know, code allots for that to be the decision of the AHJ. So do we prefer supervisory or alarm? So if we have supervisory devices, you know we'll always have tampers for sprinkler systems, or if we have any other devices. Notification appliances. We have to list the location of all notification appliances in the building, and how did they pass, did they flash, did they sound. So those are key changes from 2007 to 2010 that they make explicit. Before, you had to do some reading to find in other sections to find that requirement. Here it's no longer do you have to reference any other section. You know it's a requirement. And then we talk about the supervising station. So what all signals are we sending when we do a test inspection? Are we sending an alarm, trouble, and supervisory signal? And are they receiving all three? Because it depends on what kind of monitoring you have. I mean, they should all, at a minimum, be checking those three signals. And then that we test the system, we let everybody know it was complete, and we've signed. So that's a 2010, and it gives you kind of a sample. To a sample page to do device listings that you can kind of make your own, or the contractor can kind of make their own. So that's a key distinction between what we saw in 2007 and 2010. Like I said, 13 becomes much more modular. So I will pull up, there we go. I will pull up a (2013) test inspection template. and kind of show you the difference. Content-wise, it's not. So if we, to kind of show you guys how to navigate through it on an FPA website to find the templates, search for the 72, and then you can go to current and prior years based on whatever edition you're looking for. Once you do that, it'll have all their sample forms at the bottom. So there's the record of completion that we were talking about. And then here's all your supplementary forms. So this looks much different from the 2010 where we have an ROC for record of completion and we have a test inspection sample. Now this is what I was talking about. We break it out based on what kind of system we actually have. So, we can look at these, but like I say, content-wise, we didn't change the requirements. We just changed how we attach the required information. Okay. Do we have any questions on test inspection reports, looking at them, analyzing them, or responsibility before we jump to smoke detectors and smoke alarms?
You're awful quiet today. I know it's Monday morning. Hope everybody has their coffee. Okay.
All right, we will jump on to number 2, and smoke detectors versus smoke alarms, and understand the difference. So we'll first start with smoke detectors. Smoke detectors are tied to a fire alarm system. They're a component of the fire alarm system. They are UL 268 listed devices instead of UL 217 listed devices. So for testing intervals for these devices, we will look at our Chapter 10 again, 2007, and Chapter 14 in our 10 and 13 editions. They kind of did some reorganization of chapters, and in 10 you'll notice a lot of reserved chapters. For 13 it's filled in a little bit more, but we just kind of reorganized, and that was mainly driven based on the need to clarify a lot of voice evac requirements and some newer technologies regarding monitoring. So how the technologies we use for Central Station, UDAC, IPDACs, and cellular DACs. So, but we see the requirement to be an annual functional test. In all of these editions, we have a minimum of an annual functional test that's required. And if we look in our methods, not just in our table for our intervals, but our known methods, we can see what is actually acceptable. So sometimes you'll find out that you'll have companies that'll go around with like a magnet on addressable detectors and test them and say that they were tested. The detector did go into alarm. The wiring does work and it is programmed how they expect it to be, but I didn't actually sense any smoke. So is it a complete functional test? No. So if you go into your test methods, which are defined, like I say, in that same chapter, just a little bit before your intervals, you'll see what's acceptable for every kind of device. For anything that's initiating, they have acceptable. Some does lend itself to based on manufacturer recommendations, but the vast majority of it is defined. So if we look up smoke detectors in other than 1 and 2 family dwellings, system detectors, and single station. So we're excluding them. So we're saying all of our regular system detectors must be tested with a smoke or listed aerosol approved by the manufacturer. That's the acceptable test method, because we're actually wanting to make sure that our chamber senses smoke. And then, we also have our sensitivity requirement in with that, which we can look at now. So smoke detector sensitivity is something that, based on the contractor, you'll see a lot of variations. Some, they'll just sell the contract and they'll say, all right, we're going to do sensitivity every year for you. Or some won't even address it. And they'll wait till an inspector shows up and says, can I see your sensitivity? And they'll say, well, I've never had it done. So sensitivity is required within 1 year from installation. So that would be the first sensitivity test. Then we have the requirement after that to every alternate year after the first test. So we would say within 1 year and within 3 years, we would see sensitivity testing. If both of those are acceptable tests, then we can extend to a maximum of 5 years for our interval. And again, that's up to the AHJ to grant that 5 years, but it is within code. And then we can talk about lifespan of the detectors too. So that's kind of what we're measuring when we measure sensitivity. We're making sure that lifespan is still good, that the detector, that the chamber is still working as it was tested within the limits acceptable by UL 268. So as long as we're still testing within our sensitivity range, the detector is probably is still functioning and continues to have a life. But then if we can also have nuisance alarms that we start seeing, we're seeing an increased frequency of nuisance alarms from this detector. While it tests okay on sensitivity every year, if we're getting nuisance alarms from it, once a month or once a week, the head probably just needs to go. Put a new detector up, but that's based on the building owner to track and the contractor, the alarm contractor, to step up and say, hey, we can fix this, and let's see if that is the problem. So those are two indicators that smoke detector has reached its lifespan. So then smoke alarms. What's the difference? Again, they're standalone or multiple stations, so tandem wired appliances that meet UL 217. And how do we test those? NFPA 72 does address it again in the same chapter that smoke detectors are addressed, and in that same table where we look at testing methods. So when I read you smoke detectors, we excluded single and 2 family dwellings and single station smoke alarms. Now I will read single station and multiple station smoke alarms used in 1 and 2 family dwellings. And our only guidance is to test them according to the manufacturer. And then at least monthly. That's typically what a manufacturer will require and to document. The lifespan of these detectors, typically you will see for smoke-only detectors, you will see 10 years. And then they'll say, or per manufacturer recommendation. So if we're doing a monthly test and we fail, obviously we replace it. If some of them have built-in sensitivity, and that's how that's addressed with NFPA 72, is if the manufacturer provides sensitivity, then you would do it within your years, your same guidance. But if they don't, then it's not really addressed because it's only a 10-year life. I mean, that's pretty defined. But we see more and more carbon monoxide and smoke alarm combinations. So these will be listed in combination with UL 2034 and UL 217. A lot of them have a 10-year life. Or per manufacturer recommended or first failure. So it's the same as smoke. But if we get into the technology actually utilized for the carbon monoxide detection portion of it, there are 3 technologies utilized in carbon monoxide detection. By far the most common because it's far less expensive than the other 2 and a little more reliable. The best combination for your money, you do electrochemical gel. And so typically we'll see that with a 6-year lifespan by the manufacturer. So the smoke detector portion, the UL 217 may be listed for 10 years, but the carbon monoxide may be only listed for 6. So that's something to kind of be aware of. As you see that, to keep track of. So before, we're used to asking when we walk into a building that we see these detectors, when did you install them? And as long as it's in the last 10 years, okay, that being an acceptable answer. It's kind of a hard rule. But now, we have something to take, additional consideration to take into. So, okay, that's a carbon monoxide and smoke combination. When did you install it? What technology does it utilize, and who's the manufacturer? So you can kind of look some of that up. I've included in your kind of some background information on CO detection and different technologies utilized, because it is a pretty new requirement, and as far as it being listed in FPA 72. I have a general, just kind of information. I have a spacing study, which really is more relevant to designers, but I just included it so you can kind of have a background in it if you want to get that in depth. And then
You don't have to add it like before, because I just am sharing the whole thing. So whatever you go to, they'll be able to see. Since we went to the internet, it was just easier.
How do I start my desktop?
What are you trying to get?
Does it automatically show my desktop now?
Yep.
Okay.
Or you want me to go back to the...
I'm wanting to open... Put them on the desktop.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
And this is actually from System Sensor, so it would be a manufacturer, but it's good information, just kind of reading, that applies to kind of give you some familiarity with the technology itself, and what just the difference in between a standard smoke alarm and carbon monoxide detection. So, it goes into everything on effects, and it kind of breaks it down. This table is what I found pretty interesting to kind of let you know exactly how much exposure does what. And then section 3, I've highlighted how carbon monoxide detectors work. So this is what I was talking about, your 3 different technologies. And you can read up on those, but like I say, the electrochemical is the most prevalent just because it is a little less expensive. And here's where we talk about our limited life. And you'll see NFPA 720, that governs carbon monoxide detection, and is referenced by IBC for new construction. It's referenced by IBC 2012. Goes back to the requirements of NFPA 720 for system detectors and how they have to report. And then I highlighted a little bit on placement and spacing, what they recommend. So just to kind of give you an overview and get a little bit of familiarity with the idea. Let's see here. This is a pretty good one from UL regarding carbon monoxide. Just a decent article. And again, it's just more background, and it does cover some of the same things the system sensor does. I would say the system sensor goes into a little bit more in depth exactly how they work. But one interesting thing to note is that you will hear a different signal from CO detectors than you will from like a fire alarm or a smoke detector. So we know fire alarm signal is a temporal 3 pattern. NFPA 720 defines CO alarms as a temporal 4. So a key point that's going to tell us right there, if we're doing, let's say we're doing an inspection on a new construction hotel motel R1 occupancy, that we meet the requirements, so we do have some fuel fired appliances, and so we're needing carbon monoxide detectors in every room. If they go with system detectors, you're going to have a sounder base, because you cannot achieve temporal 4, the distinction between temporal 4 any other way than a sounder base. So that's kind of something from a designer's perspective that you guys can kind of check. So let's say they do tell you, yeah, we put something that's pretty popular are combination devices, so you'll have a smoke, heat, and CO device. We put one of those devices in the room, but we didn't provide a way to distinguish between, for notification. So that has to be there. So when you walk into new construction and say, okay, we have the multi-criteria device, but we don't have a way to distinguish for notification purposes. So, that can kind of give you just a quick thing to look for on that. Like I said, that's also a very good article from UL on that. And that we'll talk about a little bit later. So I think that's all I have in the background information regarding CO detection. But then I've also included several chapters for you from NFPA 720, and it's 2012 edition, and I just printed them from NFPA All Access. So they're there if you want to peruse, or you can log in and read for yourself, whatever. So that's basically the distinction in a nutshell. If you have any questions, if there's any way I can, I covered quite a bit, both in smoke alarms and CO detection. So if you have any questions before we take a break, be happy to answer them.
Also, if you have questions after the webinar today, you're welcome to send them to me, and I can get them to Susan, or we can also get you Susan's email and information. So either way is fine. Sometimes you have questions that come up after the fact. So You want to take a break?
Testing of duct detectors, sure. What would you like? Would you like to know methods or installation acceptance? Smoke versus magnetic. Okay. So I guess we'll start with installation. When you install a duct detector in a system, there's for acceptance, the alarm contractor should be measuring the actual suction, the actual sampling ability of the detector based on placement and airflow. So a lot of times that actually should be done to make sure we're sampling and we have pressure. You know, we have an active suction to sample through. They'll put what's called a manometer on the device, and we're just measuring suction. So that I would look for the value of that for acceptance testing. As far as for annual test inspection from methods, in 2007, Chapter 10 shall be tested and inspected to ensure the device will sample the airstream. The test shall be made in accordance with the manufacturer's published instructions. So with, I believe with most any duct detector manufacturer, in the package itself will come a magnet. And you know, you can use that all. You are not testing that the detector is sensing smoke. You are testing that the wiring to the detector and the programming of the detector is how you want it to be. So if we turn to Chapter 14 real quick, in 2010, to get there. That's when we actually start to see the language. So we're measuring the pressure differential, which is what you do with the manometer. So you're making sure that between the inlet and exhaust tube that you actually are sampling the airstream. And then again, tests shall be made in accordance with manufacturer's published instructions for the device installed. So it doesn't really tell us that we have to smoke them. But you know, it would depend on if you go to like System Sensor, or you would go to Simplex Tyco and see what they recommend. You know, what's on their data sheet or what's on their testing maintenance form. I think it's within your right as the AHJ to request, certainly on an acceptance testing, that they do smoke it, and then you know, but then it becomes a question: do we remove the cover and smoke it right into the smoke head, or do we actually spray into the duct? You know, and then how do we accomplish that? So that's why in 2010 we see the addition of the pressure differential being required for acceptance. So I don't know if I answered your question. Code is still pretty vague on the smoked or magnetic, but at least you know you're sampling the air when you do the pressure differential. Any other questions?
Okay, we're going to take a little bit of a break. Let's do 10 minutes, so about 10 after 10, check back in and we'll start then.